The Zodiac Killer Files, Uncovering the Truth. The Zodiac Killer Files, Uncovering the Truth. Listen closely. Can you hear it? The faint, metallic rustle of paper, the silent clink of a pencil against a grid. It is the imagined sound of a cryptogram being formed, an insidious puzzle delivered not for intellectual sport, but for terror. It is the echo of a chilling symbol, a crosshair superimposed over a circle, burned into the collective consciousness, an emblem of a killer whose legacy remains an open wound in the American psyche. For decades, it has stood as one of the nation's most elusive, unsettling mysteries, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer. Northern California, late 1960s. The landscape shimmered with the promise of a new era. A golden haze of idealism, peace, and burgeoning counterculture enveloped the Bay Area. The summer of love had barely faded into memory, replaced by a quiet hope for a gentler world. Yet beneath this veneer of tranquility, a shadow was beginning to stretch, long and cold, across the sun-drenched hills and sleepy suburban roads. It was a shadow that would soon engulf a generation, leaving behind a trail of victims, taunting letters, and an almost supernatural ability to evade capture. This is not another sensational retelling of the legend. This is an excavation. Over the course of this series, we will peel back the layers of myth and conjecture that have accumulated over half a century. We will examine the evidence with a precise, unblinking gaze, scrutinize the suspects who have haunted the periphery of this case, and trace the relentless, often frustrating, pursuit of a truth that has stubbornly remained hidden. Our journey begins at the very genesis of this reign of terror, where young lives were brutally extinguished under a vast, indifferent sky. The first tremor arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet horror of a deserted lover's lane. December 20, 1968. The air, crisp and cold, held the scent of damp earth and distant pine. A gravel road near Lake Herman, a popular spot for young couples seeking solitude beneath the expansive Vallejo sky. David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were parked in David's Rambler, a typical Friday night ritual. Their evening, however, was violently interrupted. At approximately 10:15 p.m., another vehicle pulled alongside them. What transpired next remains shrouded in the terrifying silence of an isolated act. David and Betty Lou were forced from their car. Moments later, the silence was shattered by gunfire. Betty Lou, fleeing in desperation, was shot 5 times in the back, falling lifelessly onto the gravel. David, found slumped beside the Rambler, had a single bullet wound to the head. They were discovered by Stella Borges, driving past on her way to work. The scene was one of shocking brutality, an execution-style double murder that left seasoned officers reeling. The initial police response, swift but lacking the benefit of foresight, yielded no immediate leads. The killer had vanished into the December night, leaving behind only 2 broken young lives and a chilling void of explanation. 7 months later, the void began to fill with a terrifying pattern. July 4, 1969. The setting again, a secluded spot favored by young couples, Blue Rock Springs Park, just 3 miles from Lake Herman Road. Darlene Ferrin, 22, and her companion, 19-year-old Mike Majo, were parked in her Corvair. Just before midnight, a car pulled in behind them. A man emerged, approached the passenger side, and without a word began firing. Darlene Ferrin was struck multiple times and died shortly after arriving at Kaiser Foundation Hospital. Mike Majo, despite sustaining severe injuries, miraculously survived the attack. This time, however, there was a critical difference. This time the killer spoke. Or rather, he called. At 12:40 a.m. on July 5th, a chilling, calm voice contacted the Vallejo Police Department, providing precise details of the attack on Farron and Majau, and crucially, claiming responsibility for the Lake Herman Road murders. "I want to report a murder," the caller stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to Public Park, you will find kids in a brown car. They have been shot with a 9 Luger. I also killed those kids last Christmas at Lake Herman Road." The call, made from a payphone just blocks from the police station, established the killer's grim identity. It marked the moment the terror became personal, direct, and disturbingly deliberate. The hunter was now taunting his prey. The chilling boast of "slaves in paradise," contained within the decoded 408-symbol cipher, was not an idle threat. It was a prelude. The Zodiac, emboldened by the authorities' inability to identify him, was already planning his next act. And it would be his most brazen, most personal yet. The crisp air of September 27, 1969, hung heavy over Lake Berryessa, a popular recreational spot in Napa County. The water shimmered, reflecting the late afternoon sun, as 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard sat on a blanket near their parked Carmen Ghia. They were students, enjoying the serene beauty of the isolated cove, a sliver of peace before the approaching evening. Then a figure emerged from the trees. He was dressed in a dark, hooded executioner's costume, the hood featuring a white bib adorned with the now infamous crosshair symbol. In his right hand, he held a 9 Luger. In his left, a long-bladed knife. He approached with an unsettling theatricality, demanding money and car keys, claiming he intended to rob them before driving to Mexico. But his intentions were far darker. He forced Hartnell to tie Shepard's hands with pre-cut clothesline, then tied Hartnell himself. This meticulous, ritualistic preparation was a chilling departure from the swift, impersonal shootings that preceded it. What followed was an act of sustained, brutal violence. The Zodiac produced his knife and began stabbing both Brian and Cecilia repeatedly. Brian endured 6 stab wounds to the back, but miraculously survived the ordeal by feigning death. Cecilia, however, was stabbed 10 times. The lake, which moments before had offered tranquility, now bore witness to a primal horror. Before disappearing back into the tree line, the killer took a black felt-tip pen and, with a chilling precision, scrawled a message on the passenger door of Brian's Carmen Ghia. Vallejo 12-20-68 7469, Sept 2769 6:30. By knife, below he signed it with the crosshair symbol. The act was not merely murder, it was a statement carved into the very metal of their escape. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later in the hospital. The Zodiac had escalated, transitioning from the gun to the blade, from distance to intimate, prolonged savagery. Less than 2 weeks later, the Zodiac resurfaced, this time in the dense urban sprawl of San Francisco. The location, the affluent, tree-lined streets of Presidio Heights. The date, October 11, 1969. His victim, Paul Stein, a 29-year-old taxi driver. At approximately 9:55 p.m., Stein picked up a fare at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets. His destination, as radioed to dispatch, was the corner of Washington and Maple Street. It was a routine fare that would become his last. Upon arrival, Stein was shot once in the head with a 9 handgun. The murder, unlike the previous remote attacks, occurred in a populated residential area. A crucial window was closing. 3 teenagers, observing from a nearby house across the street, witnessed parts of the crime. They saw a white male, dressed in dark clothing, wiping down the interior of the taxi and then calmly exiting the driver's side, walking towards the Presidio. Their immediate call to police was clear, precise. They described a white male in his 20s or 30s, between 58 and 510, medium build, wearing eyeglasses. This eyewitness account led to a crucial error that would haunt the investigation for decades. The initial police dispatch, likely a miscommunication or an assumption based on past crimes in the area, incorrectly described the suspect as a Negro male. This misdirection meant that while officers were scouring the immediate vicinity, including a patrol car that passed directly by the Zodiac, they were looking for the wrong individual. The killer, calm and collected, simply walked away into the shadows of the Presidio, slipping through the fingers of justice. The audacity of the Stein murder was underscored by the physical proof the Zodiac provided. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle, containing a piece of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt. It was a grotesque trophy, undeniable evidence of his involvement, and a further taunt to the authorities. The accompanying letter confirmed his identity, mocking the police and threatening to attack a school bus, targeting children. The Stein murder solidified the Zodiac's terrifying reputation. The subsequent months brought more cryptic pronouncements and chilling threats. There was the Halloween card, sent to the Chronicle on October 27, 1969, decorated with macabre imagery and a chilling poem, signed with the crosshairs and boasting 14 victims. Then, on November 8, 1969, the bus bomb letter arrived, further reiterating his threat to blow up a school bus. And finally, on November 12, the 340-symbol cipher was delivered, a far more complex cryptogram than its predecessor, one that, to this day, remains unsolved. The killer reveled in this macabre communication, controlling the narrative, orchestrating the fear, ensuring his legend grew with every unsolved puzzle and every unpunished act of violence. The killer reveled in this macabre communication, controlling the narrative, orchestrating the fear, ensuring his legend grew with every unsolved puzzle and every unpunished act of violence. But in the shadow of Zodiac's self-made notoriety, behind the headlines and the terror, a meticulous, often desperate, investigation was slowly, laboriously unfolding. This was the silent counteroffensive, a multi-agency effort spanning decades, marked by tireless dedication, flashes of hope, and ultimately an agonizing wellspring of frustration. The investigation, decades of frustration. The immediate aftermath of each Zodiac attack, each chilling letter, brought a flurry of activity from local law enforcement. From the quiet, rural roads of Lake Herman and Blue Rock Springs, responsibility initially fell to the Vallejo Police Department and the Napa County Sheriff's Office. Then, with the brazen murder of Paul Stein, the formidable San Francisco Police Department was drawn into the vortex. The sheer geographical spread of the crimes, coupled with the killer's audacious communication across county lines, meant that what began as localized investigations quickly fractured into a disjointed, sometimes competitive collection of efforts. Each department, armed with their own detectives and their own limited resources, initially pursued leads in isolation, a fragmented mosaic that the killer, it seemed, was deliberately exploiting. It was only as the terror escalated, as the Zodiac symbol became an emblem of widespread fear, that a more coordinated, if still imperfect, interagency approach began to coalesce. The California Department of Justice, and eventually the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, lent their considerable resources, bringing a degree of overarching strategy to the fractured landscape. Detectives like Dave Toskai of the SFPD, Ken Narlow of the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and Jack Mulinax of the Vallejo PD became weary, familiar figures, their lives consumed by the phantom lurking in the Bay Area's periphery. Their days were a relentless cycle of witness interviews, crime scene reconstructions, and the painstaking examination of every cryptic message. Early attempts at profiling the killer were, by modern standards, rudimentary. Psychologists and criminologists were consulted, attempting to construct a mental image from the killer's letters and methods. They spoke of a highly intelligent, narcissistic individual, meticulous in planning, craving attention and control, likely socially awkward but capable of blending in. Yet these early insights, though directionally sound, lacked the sophisticated behavioral analysis tools available today, often proving too broad to narrow the field of potential suspects effectively. The Zodiac was a chameleon, shifting his methods, defying easy categorization, always a step ahead of the nascent science of criminal psychology. Perhaps the most significant challenge, one that continues to haunt the case, lay in the forensic limitations of the era. The late 1960s and early 1970s predated the revolution in DNA analysis. While blood, hair, and seminal fluid were present at some crime scenes, the technology to extract and profile DNA from such minute samples simply did not exist. What might today be a definitive piece of evidence was then merely biological material, cataloged and stored, its full potential unrecognized. Fingerprint evidence was, of course, a staple of policing. At the Lake Berryessa and Paul Stein crime scenes, investigators diligently collected latent prints. Yet, despite painstaking efforts, despite comparing them against countless suspect databases, these prints yielded no definitive match. The killer, it seemed, had either been incredibly careful or incredibly lucky, or perhaps both. He moved through the world leaving just enough traces to tantalize, but never enough to entrap. Handwriting analysis emerged as a crucial, yet equally frustrating, cornerstone of the investigation. The Zodiac's distinct script, his unusual letter formations, and his signature symbol became a forensic battleground. Experts meticulously compared hundreds of samples from suspects to the authentic Zodiac letters. This was a painstaking art, not a precise science, and while it could offer strong indications, it rarely provided the absolute certainty required for a conviction. The killer, perhaps aware of this vulnerability, occasionally varied his style, or employed typed messages, further muddying the waters. Each stroke of the pen, each loop and cross, was scrutinized, yet the writer remained an enigma. And then there was the media. The Zodiac thrived on it. His letters were explicitly addressed to newspapers, demanding publication, threatening more violence if his words were suppressed. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald became his reluctant megaphones, their pages his chosen stage. While the media played an essential role in informing the public and disseminating warnings, they inadvertently amplified the killer's terror, granting him the very notoriety he craved. The constant headlines, the public fascination, the fear-mongering speculation, all fed the legend, ensuring that the Zodiac killer achieved a chilling immortality, even as law enforcement found itself locked in a decades-long struggle against a ghost. Even as law enforcement found itself locked in a decades-long struggle against a ghost. #V. Key suspects, the endless pursuit. But a ghost, even one cloaked in riddles, often leaves echoes, fragments of its earthly presence. And across 5 decades, those fragments have coalesced around a handful of individuals, each examined under the unforgiving lens of suspicion, each offering a tantalizing glimpse into the identity of the monster, yet none providing the definitive, unassailable proof. The pursuit has been endless, a relentless sifting through lives and alibis, fueled by a collective need for resolution that, thus far, has gone unanswered. The shadow of the Zodiac falls most heavily, most persistently, upon Arthur Lee Allen. A former elementary school teacher living in Vallejo, Allen emerged as a suspect in 1971, brought to the attention of law enforcement by a close friend. The initial interest was piqued by his strange behavior and a disturbing affinity for hunting. But as investigators dug deeper, the coincidences began to accumulate, forming a chilling mosaic. Allen matched the physical description provided by Mike Majo, the sole survivor of the Blue Rock Springs attack, a heavy-set man, older, with a distinctive build. He owned a Royal brand typewriter with P-type lettering, capable of producing text similar to the Zodiac's letters. He had a history of violent tendencies and pedophilia, culminating in a conviction for child molestation years later. His alibis for the murder dates were often vague or easily disproven. He claimed to have been diving in Monterey on the day of the Lake Berryessa attack, but no corroborating evidence was found. For the Lake Herman Road murders, he stated he was sleeping, a claim impossible to verify. Perhaps most unsettling were the items found during a 1991 search of his trailer: bombs in various stages of assembly, a knife, firearms, and books on cryptography. Friends and family recalled Allen speaking openly about a desire to hunt humans, referencing the short story, The Most Dangerous Game, a tale eerily similar to the Zodiac's boasts of collecting slaves in paradise. He even reportedly wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch and had a Zodiac brand toilet in his home, unsettling details that felt less like coincidence and more like a macabre fascination, or even a deliberate taunt. Yet, despite this compelling circumstantial web, the case against Allen consistently faltered on two critical fronts: handwriting and fingerprints. Experts repeatedly concluded that Allen's handwriting did not match the Zodiac's known correspondence. While some argued his writing could have been disguised, the discrepancy remained a significant hurdle. Furthermore, none of the fingerprints lifted from the crime scenes or the Zodiac letters matched Allen's. In a cruel twist of fate, DNA samples extracted years after Allen's death from the stamp and envelope flap of a Zodiac letter, the Paul Stein letter, were tested against his DNA. The results were inconclusive, or, according to some reports, definitively excluded him. This posthumous DNA exclusion, however, remains contentious, with many arguing the samples were too degraded or potentially mishandled to be definitive, leaving Allen's guilt in a perpetual state of agonizing debate for a significant segment of Zodiac enthusiasts and investigators. Beyond Allen, other figures have periodically emerged from the shadows of suspicion, their lives scrutinized for connections to the killer. Richard Gaykowski, a journalist by trade, drew attention due to his physical resemblance to the composite sketch and his residency in the Bay Area during the critical period. The theory suggested his journalistic background might have provided both the motive and the means for media manipulation, a psychological game the Zodiac clearly reveled in. Some who knew him claimed his voice bore a chilling similarity to the voice heard in one of the Zodiac's calls. Another prominent suspect was Lawrence Kane, also known as Lawrence K. Kane had a known connection to Darlene Ferrin, having met her at a psychiatric hospital in the early 1960s. His violent past, his presence in the Bay Area during the murders, and his alleged connection to other victims or persons of interest added layers of complexity. Some theorized he might have been involved in the Lake Tahoe disappearance of Donna Lass, a case many believe could be connected to the Zodiac. The pursuit has also touched upon figures like Earl Van Best Jr., propelled into the public eye by family accusations and subjective handwriting comparisons, though these theories largely failed to gain traction within official investigations. Others, such as Bruce Davis or Rick Marshall, have been meticulously examined, their lives dissected, but ultimately the trail runs cold. The sheer lack of definitive, unassailable evidence, coupled with the killer's cunning ability to weave misleading clues and disappear into the night, ensured that no conviction was ever secured. The Zodiac remained, frustratingly, a ghost with too many names.